Hey, what's up, everybody? Late night video here for me. I am back using ChatGPT again, of course, and in this video, we're going to see if we can use it to learn a little bit about React.js, because React has remained one of the most popular, probably the most popular front-end framework for a while now. Everybody's using it, lots of jobs for React, so worthwhile to see what ChatGPT can teach us about it. So because ChatGPT only knows about things up to the end of last year, it's not going to have the most recent version of React. Not a big deal. We'll just have it teach us whatever it's going to teach us, and then basically once you build a foundation with React, then you can go migrate to whatever the newest syntax is for the latest version. It's only behind by like one full version, I think. So let's get started. So the first thing we'll ask it is to give an outline for learning React.js. Okay, so it wants you to learn the basics of JavaScript and the web. That is definitely true. You want to understand as much about JavaScript as you can before you dive into a framework. Basically, frameworks and libraries like React, Angular, Vue, Lit, etc., they're all there just to make your life easier and abstract away, basically make it to where you can write less code, do more with less. But you still need to understand what's happening underneath the hood. So the more you know about JavaScript, the better. All right, so of course HTML and CSS, you're definitely going to want to know those. So install the necessary tools to set up a development environment. You'll need a code editor and a local development server to build and test your React application. So we'll start there. Learn the fundamentals of React. Start by understanding the basic concepts of React, such as components, state, and props. Practice building simple React applications. Try building a small application to get a feel for how React works and how to structure your code. Learn about advanced React. Practice building larger, more complex applications. Stay up to date with the latest developments. Okay, so we'll go back to, I think it was number 2. You want to have your environment set up. We have our editor, at least I have VS Code. You can use anything, Sublime, Atom, doesn't matter. And then we want to have our local development server. We also want to install something called Create React App. So tell me about Create React App. Let's see what it does with that. All right, so it's a tool developed by Facebook. It allows you to create a new React project with a single command. Helps you set up a new project with simple configuration without having to manually set up a build system or configure your development environment. So that's a huge kicker. So you can write React code right away if you want, but if you want to use like TypeScript or JSX or some of these other tools that React gives you, then you need like a transpiler and all this other stuff that's built into Create React App, which is this npx package or npm package, whatever it is that React has. And basically it just makes it to where you have this boilerplate to run off of, and it has everything configured. So the first thing we need to do is install Create React App. Here it just tells you how to create your first app with it. So how do I install Create React App? And it's probably an npm command. All right, so once you have node and npm installed, then you can do npm install -g. That's the global flag. Just means that we can use this as a CLI tool. So that's the first thing we're going to want to do is copy this code here, head over to our editor, and install it. I think I already have it installed, but that's interesting. What do we got here? Alright, so we're going to ignore whatever's going on there, but I think we have Create React App installed now. So this is saying use the npx create react app command to create a new app called my app. So we'll go ahead and run that command. This might take a second because it has to create a lot of files and folders. So while that does its thing, we're going to jump back over, scroll up to the original list here, and we'll go ahead and get started right away with learning about the fundamentals of React. So we want to understand the basic concepts of React, such as components, state, and props. So we'll say explain components in React. Alright, so in React, a component is a piece of code that represents a part of a user interface. Components are reusable and can be nested inside of other components. There are two types of components in React: functional components and class components. Functional components are simple functions that accept props, short for properties, as an argument and return a React element. They are usually used for presenting static data or handling simple state updates. So at this point, we probably don't know what state is. We'll have to ask and find out. So here's an example of a functional component. They're importing React from React with import React from React, and then they have a function, just a regular function. Note that the name of the function is capitalized. Welcome, and then it takes an argument props, and then it returns, this is a single line here, one element, h1 hello, and then props.name looks like it is being dynamically embedded inside of this HTML. So this syntax is really interesting. You would expect there to be like string quotations or something like that, and there's not. So this is specific to React, and then this curly bracket syntax is also specific to React. So class components are JavaScript classes that extend the React component-based class. They allow you to use additional features such as state and lifecycle methods, so that's important. Here's an example of a class component. This whole like a class that extends another class, that's the whole reason that you want to be familiar with JavaScript, because if you don't understand what classes are in JavaScript or how they work, then you would see something like this, and not only would it be brand new syntax, but also it'd be some other newer concepts that you haven't gone over. So definitely want to brush up on JavaScript before you dive into a framework like React. All right, so here we have import React, and then also they're destructuring component, capital C, from React. And here we have class instead of function. Welcome, note that it's still capitalized. Extends component, that's that component that we brought in from React. And then it uses this render syntax. So it's render, open close parens, open close curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets, or inside the block of code, we have the same return statement that we had up previously, except instead of props.name, we have this.props.name. And so this is referring to the instance of the class. All right, so both functional and class components can be rendered to the DOM by using JSX, a syntax extension for JavaScript that allows you to write HTML-like code in your JavaScript files. Here's an example of how you can use a component in JSX. So here we have import React from React, import React DOM from React DOM, and then they use React DOM.render, open parens, and then here's this welcome that we wrote up here. So it's a welcome component. It looks just like a HTML element. And then below it, document.get element by ID, and then it's looking for the root element. Note that there's a comma there. So this render is the method on the React DOM class, and we have two arguments when invoking the method. It even tells us in this example, the welcome component is rendered to the DOM element with an ID of root. The component is passed a prop called name, which is used to display the name John in the rendered HTML. So here we have this attribute, name is equal to John, what they call a property or a prop. Components are an essential part of building applications with React. They allow you to divide your UI into reusable pieces and manage their state, there's that word state, and behavior independently. So if you know about just coding in general, then you should already understand the concept of state. But basically, when we talk about state, we're just talking about things that could potentially change and be dynamic, but their current state, what they are currently. So that name, John, is hard-coded in there, but you could potentially have some other code in there to where it could take some user input and be changed. That information from the input could go into the database where it updates the state on the back end inside the database, and then it reciprocates back to the front end and gets updated in the DOM. All right, so let's jump back over to our code editor. Some crazy stuff going on here. So it's just saying that these require a certain version of Node, and the current version I'm using is 16.6.0. They want 16.10.0, and then I have npm 8.4.0. All of these want 16.10.0. I'm not even sure which versions I have currently, but I use NVM, so we'll just list it. They said you could use 18. I thought one of them said you could use 18 something. There's just 18 right on that one, but they all do 16.10. So we'll do an nvm install 16.10.0 and let that download. Alright, so while that does its thing, let's just jump back over here and learn some more stuff. Okie dokie. So the next thing that they were talking about was state. Perfect. And then props. We already kind of talked about props. We can expand on it, but let's learn about state. Let's hear it from ChatGPT. So explain state in React. So in React, state is a piece of data that determines a component's behavior and render information to the user. State is managed within the component and can only be modified using React's setState method. State is different from props, which are passed to a component from its parent. While props are used to pass data down the component tree, state is used to manage data within a component. Here's an example of a component with state. So here we have a clock component, and remember, this is a class, so it has a constructor function, takes in props, it supers the props, because remember it extends component, and then it says this dot state is equal to an object, and inside of here it's got some state. So here we have time set to a new date, which will just give you the current date at the time that this is run. Then they have another function here, component did mount. This is a pre-named function. I believe it's considered a lifecycle method, but we could ask it to explain that. But let's just assume that from the name, the component did mount, so this is something that gets fired off after the component has done whatever mounting is. So this dot timer ID is equal to set interval this dot tick 100. And so at this point, just looking at state, we don't have a this dot tick, but as we continue down here, we have a component will unmount. This clears the interval using the timer ID that was set right here, and it was set on this, right? So we have access to it, and we can just access it from this dot timer ID anywhere else in the code. Tick is another method here. This dot set state, so there's that set state that we were told about earlier, and it's updating this state right here, which had time set to new date. In this case, it is setting time to the current date. So every time a tick of the clock happens, it sets the current time. And guess what? It does it every 1,000 milliseconds. So every 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. So every second the clock ticks. And when it ticks, it updates the time inside the state with the current date, which includes the time. Ultimately, we have this render function down here, or render method, and it returns inside parens this JSX, and we have a div. You always, they don't explain this, but you always have to have like an outer wrapping div for everything inside your component to get rendered into. So here we have an H1 and an H2 side by side. H1, just some static text, hello world. H2, it is, and then there's those curly brackets from earlier where we can assume that some dynamic information is being embedded or rendered into this HTML template. It says this.state.time, so that's that this.state.time property, .toLocale time string, and that's just going to format it for us. So we have some nice output. So to let it explain, in this example, the clock component has a state object with a single property called time. Time property is set to the current date and time when the component is mounted. The component also has a tick method that updates the time state using the set state method, causing the component to re-render and display the updated time. So that right there is super important, right? Causing the component to re-render whenever you use set state. So if we look, where is it? Here, the tick method, which after the component mounts is invoked every 1 second. So it's this.tick, 1 second, this.tick, 1 second. Every second the state is updated. So every second, not only is the state updated, but because the state is updated, the output of the component on the page is also updated, is re-rendered in the DOM. It's important to note that you should avoid modifying state directly. Instead, you should use the setState method to update state, as it ensures that the component and its children re-render correctly. State is an important concept in React, as it allows you to manage data within your components and determine their behavior and rendering. Properly managing state can make your React applications more efficient and easier to understand. So they don't mention it here, but I'm pretty sure Redux is the tool that you use to like manage state across much larger applications with lots of different components. But yeah, like I said, state management is very important. Okay, so it looks like we have this new version of npm installed. So we'll go ahead and use it, and then go ahead and rerun the create React app. Let's see. Oh, that was weird. My ear like popped. Let's let it install the create React app real quick. Okay. The directory my app contains files that could conflict. I think it's because it already created one for us. Okay. Alrighty. So here's our folder structure. We have a node modules, a package.json, package lock JSON, and a public directory, a readme.md, and a source directory. So these first three should be very familiar to you if you've ever done anything with Node, Express, npm, anything like that. Then we have this public directory, readme, and source. So let's go ahead and open the readme.md file. And I have a preview tool, but I don't remember the command to open it. So we'll just read the markdown. Alright, so just to zip through, basically this project was bootstrapped with Create React App. You can go look at the documentation here. Available scripts, you have your npm start, runs the app in development mode, gives us access to the app on localhost 3000, and then it'll reload when you make changes. That's amazing. You may also see any lint errors in the console. That's also amazing. Alright, npm test launches the test runner in an interactive watch mode. You can see the section here in the docs about running tests. Very important. Definitely going to try and cover some testing stuff in the future. I feel like nobody ever covers it because maybe it's boring, or it's not quite as interesting as like writing the code. But testing your code is super important, especially if you run a company or if you work for a company that has production code. All right, so npm run build builds the app for production to the build folder. It correctly handles bundles React in production mode and optimizes the build for the best performance. The build is minified and the file names include the hashes. Your app is ready to be deployed. That's amazing. There's a whole section about deployment. Run eject. One-way operation. Once you eject, you can't go back. If you aren't satisfied with the build tool and configuration choices, you can eject at any time. This command will remove the single build dependency from your project. Instead, it will copy all the configuration files and the transitive dependencies, Webpack, Babel, ESLint, etc., right into your project so you have full control over them. All the commands except eject will still work, but they will point to the copied scripts so you can tweak them. At this point, you're on your own. Cool. So if the pre-configured stuff doesn't work, then you can eject it and do it yourself. You don't have to ever use eject. The curated feature set is suitable for small and middle deployments, and you shouldn't feel obligated to use this feature. However, we understand blah, blah, blah. All right, learn more, code splitting, analyzing the bundle size, making a progressive web app. So they're just like documentation. And then they have a thing about whether if the build fails to minify, you can go read troubleshooting docs. All right, cool. So npm start is what we're looking for. So we'll run that command, and I'm going to allow access here, and it automatically opened localhost 3000, and it looks like it has like an example component. So you edit source app.js and save to reload. So we'll go ahead and open that there, and we'll open a new terminal, and we'll cd into, I think it's like chat react my app. Okay, cool. So source is the directory where all of this, if you're not familiar with this type of project structure, all the code that you edit is in source, and then whenever you run the build command, it'll put everything into a different folder, all the files that you deploy with. So inside source, here's that app.js file that we were told we could mess with. So we'll do code app.js, and we'll drag this down. All right, so right out of the gate, you might recognize the syntax a little bit from the chat stuff we were doing, but here is a function called app, and it does the capital A, and then it returns, and then here's this HTML-like syntax. This is JSX, and here's that wrapper div that I mentioned that everything has to go inside of. And then this is everything we're looking at on the right. It's here. So edit source code app.js and save to reload. We're just going to change the period to an exclamation and press save. And voila, without me having to click or refresh or anything, it updated over here on the right side. So that's pretty neat. You can see that export default app is used to export this app component out of this app.js file, which means it can be imported into a different file. And so if we look again here, we have the app.js and the app CSS. You can see up here where they bring the app CSS into it. So that's cool. There's the test file. So they already have the test file ready to go if you want to write tests for this component. Then they have a main index CSS file, a main index.js file, and then they've got a couple other things. The logo.svg savage file, that's the spinning logo right here. And then the report web vitals JS and the setup test, which we're not going to talk about those right now. All right, so let's go ahead and see what's going on inside this index.js file. So here is where they're importing React from React. They're importing React DOM from React DOM client. They import the main CSS file. They import the app component. They import this report web vitals from that file that we looked at a second ago. And then they select the root element. Root is equal to react dom.create root document.get element by ID root. And then they take that element and they render react.strict mode. And then inside of it, this is where they put that app component. And so then they have, if you want to start measuring performance in your app, pass a function to log results. For example, report web vitals console log, or send to an analytics endpoint. Learn more at this link. And then they've got this little function down here. So we're not worried about that. Okay. So we should be able to just start creating components. Now, technically, you'd want to follow the structure where you like have a components folder and then you put the individual components inside the folder. But just for the sake of like getting something on paper and just seeing it output that wasn't like pre-made for us, we can just put it all in the same folder. Okay, so let's do something really simple here. We'll do touch and we'll call it navbar.js. And then likewise, we could have done it all in the same command, but we'll do a navbar.css. And then we'll open navbar.js. Now app.js, we can just go ahead and copy everything from here and paste it over as a template to use. We don't care about the logo. We don't need that. We are interested in importing the CSS, so we'll just go ahead and call this one navbar instead of app. Now we're going to start with a functional component or function component, and we're going to call it navbar instead of app. And so we have some nice linting here. It's just saying, hey, you declared this, but you never used it. Down here, we're exporting. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we export navbar. And then the div is fine. We're going to get rid of everything inside the div. And basically from here, this is where we can code in whatever we want. And so technically we could bring in Bootstrap. I'm not going to complicate things right out of the gate. I just want to put some simple HTML in here and just see what happens. So let's go ahead and do like an unordered list. And so JSX, I think if you install something for it, you can use all the regular HTML shortcuts, but right now I don't have that. So one thing I think you could do is change your syntax to HTML, and then you could use emit. So in this case, I'll just do something really basic. I want home, about, contact, and then of course if you want to change it back to JavaScript, you can. Probably, again, you could probably get JSX on here and be able to use the emit commands inside of the JavaScript highlighting. Alright, so we just created something really simple. Class name here, we're going to change it from app to navbar. And notice something here, class name is normally, if you add a class to an HTML element, you just have class. But because class means something else in React, they've changed it to class name. But if you didn't understand that, then you could just say explain class name in React. And it'll say, hey, in React, the class name attribute is used to specify a class name for a DOM element. It works in a similar way to the class attribute in HTML, but it is written in camel case and passed as a prop to the element. Here's an example of how you can use the class name attribute in a JSX element. Div, class name container, the h1, class name title. So this will render the following HTML. So you can see here it's just converted to class is equal to container, class is equal to title. Anyway, it goes on here, but that kind of answers our question, so we'll keep moving forward. Alright, so this is being exported, which means that over here in index.js, we can import it. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this to navbar. And then basically it's just telling us, I think, that we're importing it, but we're not using it. So we'll put it above app. You notice the syntax here, there's no closing element. There's just that / right before the closing caret. So if we'll save this and we go back over here, here's our navbar up top. Obviously the styling is, there is no styling. So I'm curious to see if we open up the CSS file and just begin writing some CSS directly in here, what'll happen. We can, of course, always open up the app CSS file and just compare. Here you can see there's that .app with a capital A. That's that class name that they used. And then they've got some other cool stuff in here that makes all this centered, and the font and the color and the rotation of the animation. Okay, so going back to navbar.css, we should be able to just do a navbar selection. And then for the navbar, let's think. Oh, just this is awesome. So let's see here. Give me some CSS for a simple navbar with 3 list items inside of a, we'll say, unordered list. Have them sit side by side and appear in all caps. So here's some CSS. So the first thing it does is it takes the list style and sets it to none. So that's the little bullet points next to the list items. It's going to go ahead and remove those. And then it's using flexbox basically just to throw everything on one line. And it's going to center it. You can see here we have our nav ul class navbar. And I'm trying to see the difference between these two. Looks like they're the same, except that in this case it uses a class. So on this one, if we look at our navbar.js, we have navbar, and then inside of it we have the ul and the li. And so here, if we paste this in, we can just do a navbar ul, and then I think you can do a navbar li, and it should update it accordingly. I don't think that you have to do that. Yeah, it doesn't make a difference. Basically saying any list item inside the navbar. Alright, so here just did space between, basically equal space between these, and it throws them up. So nothing crazy, but you can see how you can not only use ChatGPT to learn concepts, but you can also use it to automate a lot of typing. And if you can't remember, like, oh, how do I do that one thing with CSS or JavaScript or whatever the language is, then you can just ask ChatGPT for some help. Obviously, it's not always going to give you the perfect output. You're going to have to tweak things and change it however you want. But in this case, we have created a navbar component that we have thrown into this existing, whatever you want to call it, the main component. And now we have the navbar and the app component going into our index.js file where they have the main rendering happening. All right, so probably going to stop there. One thing I'm curious about is maybe how we could dynamically do the whole point of components is that they're reusable, right? And so sure, if you have a website where it needs this one nav that has home, about, and contact on every page, then that's what you'll get. But you may want to do different list items, different menu items on different pages, and still be able to use this navbar across those pages. So rather than having to go in there and manually change it, you'd probably want like a dynamic way to do it. And so if you remember, we can pass in props, right, from the parent component. So I think we get access to props like this with the function, and then index here we have the navbar, and so we'll give it a prop name. We'll call it what should we call it? Maybe like menu items. And so here I'm just like totally winging it, but let's see if we can embed a variable, and we'll just call it menu items, and then let's see if we could create it up here. So at this point, I'm just like hacking it together to see what might work. So const menu items is equal to, let's do an array, and we'll do home and about and contact. So the same ones that we have in there currently. And what we want to do, hopefully, if this works, is iterate over these and create a list item for each. So I'm not really sure how that works, but I think in React we would do something like this. Or no, we're not doing this because it's functional. Props dot menu items dot map item, and we will go ahead and open this up, and then here we'll do a list item, and then we'll try and render in the item, which should be the name of it. This is not looking legit to me. All right, so it broke up top. Let's go ask chat. So write a nav bar component in React that accepts a menu items prop that can be, let's go ahead and capitalize it, iterated over to populate the nav bar links. All right, scrolling down. So here's navbar. It uses curly brackets for menu items here. And I think that's just because it is destructuring it directly from props, if I'm not mistaken. So that you don't have to do a props.menu items. You can just do a menu items. So interesting. It has a key on the list item, and I can talk a little bit more about that. I think it has to do with I forget what they call it. We can ask it in a second, but if you wanted to like reorder them or something, it would keep track of where things were. So menu items.map, that looks pretty similar to what we're doing for item, the list item, and they put an anchor tag in there. We didn't really get that far. And then they have a property called ID, a property called URL, property called label. So this is an array of objects. Ours is just an array of text, and that's fine. So here you have menu items, ID 1, 2, 3, label, URL, and then here you pass. So everything's the same. Props, so here they did menu items, so that's a cool little feature. And then they're rendering everything the same way we did, except the item. This is interesting. This is a parenthesis, and then down here, that's a closing parens. We have double closing parens, and then we have the list item with the item inside of it. So if we save that, we go back here, it works. So that's what we were missing, other than updating the syntax for the props, was the parentheses instead of the curly brackets. And I'm guessing it's because this is actually, let's see what it says. Function. So this talks about the key thing. Each list item element is given a unique key prop, which is used by React to optimize the rendering of lists. So we could have them expand on that because that's kind of general. Of course, they talk about the label and the URL. That's all fine. And so I'm curious about the parens here. So let's go ahead and have it explain this. All right, so in this code snippet, the map method is used to iterate over the menu items array and create a list of li elements. The map method is a higher order function that takes a callback function as an argument and applies it to each element in the array. Callback function is an arrow function with a single parameter item which represents each element in the menu items array. The function returns a JSX expression. So that, I believe, is what we're seeing here. This is a JSX expression. And of course, so that's what allows us to use JSX inside there, so that makes sense. And that would explain the parentheses. All right, so I lost where I was. That creates a list item element with a unique key prop and an A element inside of it. It talks about the key prop is used by React to optimize the rendering of lists and should be set to a unique value for each element in the list. In this case, the ID property of each menu item is used as the key prop. So that's good to know. Anchor element, href, yada yada. We didn't do ours like that because our links don't actually go anywhere yet. We're just outputting some nonsense. All right, so this has been an example of how you can use ChatGPT to just jump right into any language or framework and just start building and hacking away. You know, you could spend as much time as you wanted on this and you can learn a lot of stuff. But here what we've accomplished is creating an application. Granted, it didn't tell us right out of the gate that we need to use create React app, so you might have had to do a little digging. The other thing that I would highly recommend is that you always, when you're doing something like this, even though we didn't do it in the video, you use the actual documentation for whatever it is you're trying to learn. So you go to React, use your documentation. In React documentation, they're going to tell you, hey, you should use create React app to build your application. And that way you already kind of know in the back of your head, okay, I need to use that. And then you can have, if the documentation doesn't tell you what you need to know about create React app, then you can have ChatGPT help you out. So it's kind of just like a back and forth of reading documentation, using it to the best of its abilities, and then also supplementing with ChatGPT where you need to. So the thing I like about Chat is that rather than going and Googling and then looking through a Stack Overflow or documentation or whatever comes up and trying to decipher like what's what, it kind of gives you very direct answers to your questions. Now, of course, should be taken with a grain of salt. They're not always correct. But everything that we've learned and done seems to be working. So it seems to work pretty well in this type of application. So again, here we have this little front end app. You could use the npm run build tool to get the output, and you could deploy it if you wanted to. Obviously, nothing's really happening yet, but you can start building more components for your header and for your footer and for any side menus, and basically you can start building components for each different page of your application, and then you have to go back and learn more about state so you can figure out how to render different components based on conditions and state and things like that. But hopefully you enjoyed just tinkering around with me, getting your feet wet and getting more familiar with ChatGPT and then now React. So thanks for watching, and we'll catch you all in the next video. Peace.